had to step up to try to manage this because the United States government wouldn't. For a certain amount of time, it was voluntarily ran by migrants themselves to try to accommodate new incoming migrants and giving them, putting their name on la lista. And then in August 2020, Title 42 was invoked. I'm sure we know maybe a little bit about this as well. Title 42 is a public health code that dates back to 1944, which basically essentially turns migrants away on the basis of disease control. So during COVID, this was utilized, and it was the first of its kind. Public health code had never been invoked in the United States to control immigration policy like this. During its course of action, 1.8 million people were forcibly removed. A lot of these people were repeat crossings, trying to enter the United States, sometimes out of desperation to maybe escape a night off of the streets. And Title 42 effectively increased expulsions. And so it wasn't an effective way to go about it. And in the name of public health, it was a little ironic because it was forcing more people to stay in shelters, in close quarters, which doesn't help with the spread of COVID. The NYCLU ended up creating a lawsuit against the government for the use of Title 42 and its unconstitutionality for enacting the public health code to deny people the human right of seeking asylum, essentially closing the border for an undetermined amount of time. So this lawsuit became, it turned into what we call the Wisha agreements, where basically the Biden administration only allowed a select amount of people with an extreme amount of need to be allowed to be processed for their asylum. And so this bar for need, whether it's medical or something else, is pretty arbitrary. And a lot of immigration judges would kind of just like close and deter things as they please. So the structure was pretty difficult to manage. I was working with Alalo during this time, and a very slim amount of people were able to actually be paroled into the United States. It was pretty heartbreaking. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the reverse effects of Title 42 and these immigration policies. Let's see. I want to talk about, obviously, like I said, keeping people in shelters, in close quarters, or in encampments on the street allowed for the spread of disease. When you're living in encampments, you're exposed to heavy rains, cold. I think not only the spread of COVID, but also the spread of chickenpox and the flu was very common. And people were living in really uncomfortable and unlivable circumstances for a long amount of time. I also think that the informal economy really struggled during COVID, and lots of these workers without a Mexican visa had limited opportunities for jobs, subject to long hours, long wages, no healthcare, of course, and not enough money to survive. And I think it is a little, there's a point to be made about the way that these policies were excluding only asylum seekers. Like for United States citizens like myself, I could cross over into Mexico with no problem during this time in COVID to get, tacos, beer, whatever, without a proof of vaccination, without proof of a negative COVID test, and go in and out as I please. But effectively turning away in a discriminatory manner all asylum seekers and denying that human right. And while Title 42 has been recently overturned, like I said, there's been a lot of rocky back and forth. People are still unclear about the status of their legal proceedings. Immigration judges have been dealing with it differently, blocking people for different reasons, and a real lack of structure to going forward past this period of time. Self-quarantining wasn't an option for these migrants. There were possibilities for maybe people to be paroled in the United States and isolate in the families of U.S.-based, family members and friends. Even outdoor processing wasn't utilized in the way that it could have. Of course, when COVID supplies such as, masks, vaccinations, tests became more widely available, these people were the last to be considered for the distribution of these supplies. And it kind of just demonstrates a larger notion of neglect. Shelters became overburdened, overpacked, and lots of, especially Central American migrants and Haitian migrants, experienced document-based discrimination in Mexico as well. And I think, how do we get this? How do we do it before? So this section will be focusing on Central American discrimination in Mexico, both from Mexican federal officials, other federal agencies, and regular civilians. So just a little background on some reasons of migration. There's a lot of economic insecurity and unstable governance within Central American countries, specifically Northern Triangle countries like Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. So this is from the Migration Data Portal, and it shows that the COVID-19 pandemic really shifted migration patterns into the northern border of Mexico and the United States. By the end of 2020, there were a total of 714,558 refugees and asylum seekers in the world originating from Central America and Mexico. Most of them, again, were coming from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. These countries face a lot of political insecurity, economic insecurity overall. So as their countries were not stable, they were forced to move up the north. And the United States was obviously the main destination for a lot of these refugees and asylum seekers. So Central Americans often faced racial discrimination in the border cities, where many of them were forced to copy Mexican accents or Mexican mannerisms in order for them to look like Mexican and less Central American. Not only was this in the communities where citizens were discriminated against these people. Should I stop?
Yeah, so sorry, we have a minor. Hold on. Sorry about this. I didn't want to interrupt you, Marlene. Let's see here. So I guess I have to do participants and make co-host. Okay, so she can. I guess they're having problems with sending it to YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, so hopefully that works. Sorry about that. Didn't want to interrupt you.
He's saying no.
Keep going. Okay.
No. Saying no.
Oh. Hold on.
Do you have his number?
Yeah, no, let me just manage.
Gracias.
Ya está, Enrique.
Thank you. I just want to double check with the people in Tijuana. Sorry for you, speaker. We have a classroom in Tijuana who is also trying to hear your presentations in Spanish.
Uh-huh.
So we have here a translator that also is going to help us, Julian Reyes.
Uh-huh.
You could see Julian, are you there? Let's see if he's still there. And I am not sure if the people in Tijuana already have, apparently they haven't connected yet, no?
Recording stopped.
Mm-hmm.
So there are, Julian, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay. Entonces, let's do this. When the problem is that the people in Tijuana, let me just see if they already are in the room. Because they should be inside Zoom. And sorry, but it's a big group there. What is a group there for people in?
Yeah, I made Maria the co-host.
Excellent.
So can she do the?
Yes. Oh.
You want to continue, or do you want us to resume, or wait?
Give me 1 minute.
Okay.
But meantime, Julian, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so
I think yeah, I did.
you are going to be also translator.
And then binational conference.
All right.
Then it does that.
Entonces, we are also working as a translators
Me está dejando.
here.
It's not letting me.
Yes.
So,
I think their service is down.
Octavio
Yeah.
is going to
Mira, I did that before. Nothing
put
happened.
you and us in the room as a
No, I'm kind of
interpreters.
confused now.
In this
Alright.
Yeah.
moment, in this moment,
Yeah.
they are not going to able
Yeah.
to listen
Yeah.
us anymore.
make someone else
But the
laugh.
people
Yeah, I did
Right.
that. I just did
are
that.
going to be
I
able
made
to
it for
listen
somebody else.
Spanish. So what about if what
Oh,
Option.
um,
make the host.
you
Make
stay
you
in
the
the
host.
main, oh no, just
Try that maybe.
you select, and we are the translation, you select to be in the room to listen in Spanish.
Okay.
Okay, Julian?
Alright. Where to that?
I tell you in a second.
Okay.
Alright.
All right. So okay. So let's continue. Wait. No. Wait. I can't. Well, you have to. You have to set up the translation over there. I can't do it here. Well, it won't let me be the host now.
Oh yeah, claim host.
Reclaim host. Okay. All right. Well, let's continue. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Technicalities. All right. Uh, all right. Who's gonna? Well, they're gonna have to. Oh, jeez.
It's okay.
Okay.
Is this
No,
assistant?
no, not Kathy. Is it Julian? Are you the translator right now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I'll make you the translator.
Alright. Thank you.
Julian. Here we go.
Exit.
Oh yeah, Spanish, right? Spanish.
Mhm. We have to X out these ones.
I don't think so. Oh, there we go. Yeah, maybe that's right. Julian. Okay.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so let me share my screen again. Okay, sorry about that, man. Slideshow. I'm so sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay, there you go. So you can, there you go.
Oh, it works now?
Yeah, it
Okay,
works. All right.
sounds good. Okay, I'm just start again with the xenophobia section. But Central Americans often face a lot of racial discrimination in the border cities they were at, mostly from Mexican civilians and also INM officers, which is Mexican immigration. They would often try to copy a Mexican accent or Mexican mannerism so that they can look less Central American or be perceived not as Central American. This was not only in the communities, it was also heavily present in the media and is being promoted by Mexican officials, such as the previous mayor of Tijuana, Juan Manuel Castellam, who stereotyped Central American migrants as violent criminals, which led to a lot of anti-immigrant protests in Tijuana and an upkick in discrimination against Central American migrants who were in these border cities. So just before I move on, xenophobia against Central Americans has made their lives harder in basically every single way. It has affected them when it comes to getting paperwork from people in Mexico, like immigration, resources, and has also made them more susceptible to crimes because they're lacking housing, because they're not allowed to rent, because of lack of documents. It all is turned back to discrimination. One of the examples of Mexican officials not wanting to assist Central American migrants is the busing program. So IN agents were making it harder for Central American asylum seekers to go to their court hearings because they would essentially force, but sometimes they would try to convince these migrants to get on these buses and they would move them to cities that are further away from the border. And at some point, you can see it as an advantage because a lot of these or a lot of the Central Americans were in very dangerous border cities such as Matamoros and Nuevo Laredo. But so they would take the bus to go to like other cities like Chiapas and other places that were safer. But what INM failed to explain was that under the bus program, there was no ride provided back to their asylum hearings. So they would be shipped, a day, 2 days away from their location. or they would be bused 2 days away from the location, and they had
Se ha
no
escuchado también por ahí.
court hearing, and they
Pero
were
¿cómo
also not always
traduce?
dropped off at a location of choice.
Parece que no le está
Sometimes
haciendo.
people would want to be like, oh, I want to go to this city because my family lives there. But the bus drivers and INM would refuse to drop them off there and would drop them off further in places that were unfamiliar and dangerous to these migrants. There was also a lot of crime that Central Americans were facing. Mostly, a lot of them were exposed to rape, kidnapping, extortion, assault, and psychological trauma, not just from Mexican officials, but from organized crime groups such as cartel groups, the Gulf Cartel and the Zetas. They were exposed to their crimes heavily. For Mexican officials, a lot of
Ya
the
se le
crime
escucha
that
mejor,
they
mucho mejor la traducción.
practiced against Central Americans consisted of extortion. So Human Rights Watch interviewed 71 Venezuelans who traveled through Mexico to seek asylum between September and December of 2020. Nearly half of the interviewees said they were targeted for extortion by federal officials. 16 said they pulled them off buses or out of line at airports and threatened deportation if they did not pay a bribe. This was mostly the way that Mexican officials were taking advantage of Central Americans, threatening them with deportation, to kill them, to turn them into cartel groups if they didn't pay a certain amount of money. This was just obviously for their own personal gain, not for a specific reason. And with organized crime groups within the same study, 27 cases said criminal groups intercepted wherever they were stationed at the time, either around the border cities or in migrant shelters. They were kidnapped or threatened to be kidnapped if they didn't pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. So now this section will be talking about anti-Blackness in the borderlands and the Haitian immigrant experience. So before I go on, obviously anti-Blackness extends from colonialism and Spanish colonization in Mexico, where African descended people were discriminated against and put under the caste system. There's a Spanish caste system that was implemented, and anyone with a Spanish bloodline would be put above. So basically just colorism to this day. So just a little bit about Haitian immigration. In 2010, after the hurricane in Haiti, a lot of immigrants were allowed to come into the United States under humanitarian parole provisions, where they were allowed to stay in the United States for up to 3 years because the United States acknowledged that conditions in their country was not sufficient enough to support people in literally every single way. But in 2016, the Obama administration had a lot of difficulty trying to meter the large number of Haitian migrants coming to the border. And because these large number of migrants were coming to the border, they actually decided to overturn the policy from 2010 where they wouldn't deport Haitian migrants, and they started to deport them at really extreme rates. And it was pretty bad because a lot of Haitian migrants were coming over, and they actually didn't know that the policy change was in place. So they were coming over thinking they would be let in, but they were actually rejected and deported back to Haiti. More recent migration, basic simple things like COVID-19, there's limited employment in Haiti, politics, there's mass protests and economic downturns with political corruptness in Haiti, gang violence where extortion and violence force people out of their home country. So that's what's been going on right now. So discrimination against Haitians, Mexican federal officers use a lot of racist tactics, mostly, again, like extortion, same with the Central Americans, where they would often leave Haitian people to fend for themselves when it comes to housing, receiving documents like visas, documents for housing, and all these other things. And a recent example of Haitian discrimination is the U.S. violation of Del Rio migrants, which these two pictures, the bottom one is the Del Rio Bridge by Texas, and the top picture is the one that went viral with a CBP officer assumingly whipping the Haitian migrant, which actually ended up not being true. There's a whole case that happened for that. But basically, 15,000 migrants were waiting by the Del Rio Bridge in Texas to seek asylum, and the United States was worried about the increase of migrants. So they implemented something called a comprehensive strategy, that's what they called it, to address the large number of migrants in the border. And this resulted in the expungement of many Haitian migrants. They were forcing them on buses, taking them to airports, and essentially deporting them back to Haiti with no other option, without even talking to them about the option for asylum. There was also a lot of language barrier issues where Haitian people struggled to communicate for their own issues in Mexico. There was a lack of translation to Haitian Creole. And that also hindered their ability to access public health services, which, because they essentially didn't know where to look for help because none of the information was in Creole. And they also just had no interpreters while they were at these appointments. And it also limited educational opportunities because a lot of them did not speak Spanish. And then another issue with discrimination against Haitians was birthright registry. So basically, anyone born in Mexico has the opportunity to be a Mexican citizen. That's granted. But officials working at local registries that issue birth certificates refused to accept valid passports from Haitians, and they often required both of the parents' passports. But because Haiti is so unstable right now, it's very difficult for them to receive this paperwork from their government. So oftentimes they didn't have the paperwork, and these registries would just leave these Haitian children they wouldn't allow them to be citizens. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to be talking about another vulnerable group of migrants in the borderlands within the last year that I think isn't talked about maybe enough. But ever since October 21, when the Afghan government fell under the rule of the Taliban, large amounts of migrants are fleeing Afghanistan and staying in countries such as Pakistan and Turkey. But also migrating west, and a lot of them have found themselves at the U.S.-Mexico border. So after the fall of the government, the Biden administration implemented humanitarian parole for Afghan migrants to be let in because of the circumstances. However, traveling through Mexico is, I'd say, especially difficult for these Afghan migrants, mainly because of the language barriers and also the social and cultural differences that are pretty stark between the two countries. The three most common languages spoken in Afghanistan are Dari, Pashto, and Farsi. And not only is the alphabet completely different, but also like pronunciation is widely different as well, which makes learning Spanish and English and communicating and traveling through sometimes multiple countries extremely difficult. And there's also lack of Islamic support in Mexico. I'm pretty sure there's like less than the Muslim population in Mexico is less than like 0.1%. And these people have definitely like seen what's been happening on the media, seeing these Haitian migrants being violated and attacked in Del Rio, hearing stories about Central American migrants, being separated from their kids in detention centers. So that fear, alongside the understanding that you're going to be in a place that is completely different than everything you've known after you being forced to leave your home country, creates a lot of trauma in these people's lives. So in response, something that has been super positive was in 2021, Tijuana had the opening of the first Islamic migrant shelter called the LMF, the Latino Muslim Foundation. And this organization has been monumental in the support of not only Afghan migrants, but also other Northern African migrants from all over the world that practice Islam, allowing them a space to practice, their daily rituals and prayers where they can feel comfortable and safe and accepted, and also have access to halal meats and groceries and foods, which is really important, and also a point of discomfort when you're leaving your home country and going to a completely different world. I think another reason why LMF has been super influential in helping the Afghan migrants is because they have also started programs in San Diego as well. So operations out of both sides of the border. They have a humanitarian relief and immigration assistance program, as well as a food security program with parolees, refugees, and immigrants in San Diego. Alongside this, the Afghan Parolee Assistance Program, or the APA, is the department that I work in personally at the International Rescue Committee. It was implemented by the U.S. Department of State, and basically an assistance program for Afghan parolees coming in across the nation. And so what we do at the IRC under this program is helping people get their kids enrolled in school, find access to public services. But something that has been really difficult for these Afghan migrants has been access to housing. especially during COVID. The housing market in San Diego, I'm sure we all know, is incredibly expensive. And one thing that's especially difficult for these African migrants is that, they don't have proof of income when they first get here. They don't have a good credit score or a credit card at all. They don't have previous rental history or any of these like rental regulations. So it can be really hard for them to find housing that's affordable, first of all, and landlords that want them to be their tenants. They face a lot of xenophobia and racial discrimination because of who they are, coming from Afghanistan. And the only people that will really rent to them are those who kind of open up their apartments and their homes out of the kindness of their heart, and with the understanding that these people have a lot of need, and kind of waive some of those rental requirements. And so luckily there has been like a great community, especially in East County and El Cajon, of landlords that allow these people to live in their units. Another organization that I want to mention briefly is Helping El Cajon Refugees, or HECR. This is more of a community-based neighborhood organization that has been huge in supporting refugees and parolees in East County and El Cajon since they started coming a little bit over a year ago. Most of these people are like moms working out of their garages, utilizing Facebook Messenger to gather donations from the community and moving them with their own minivans to help these newly incoming migrants. And I think that this movement and organization has been super representative of the type of action that we need to be taking collectively to help those people that are newly arriving in San Diego, and it has been a huge success so far. I want to make a point to talk about Ukrainian migrants and compare some of the experience that they have had coming to the U.S.-Mexico border as well. So after the Russian invasion, lots of Ukrainians had needed to find refuge in other countries, such as the United States. The Biden administration opened our doors to expedited humanitarian parole opportunities for Ukrainians. I think there's a point of conversation to have about the way that Americans had allowed maybe a more empathetic view towards Ukrainian migrants coming into the United States comparatively to Central American and Haitian migrants, Black and brown bodies that have been living, on the streets in Tijuana for a while now. There was quick volunteer organization, 2 to 3 day waiting periods for the humanitarian parole processing, which comparatively is unheard of to a lot of people trying to seek asylum still even. And I think this is a conversation about ethnicity, race, and religion in terms of the borderisms and the experiences that these people have. These white Christian Ukrainian people coming in and being processed, taken on safe shuttles to shelters in Carlsbad is a different experience than many of the migrants that we have previously talked about here today. And I also think that there's something to be said about the cultural, social, and political perceptions of where and how we give our humanitarian aid to the migrants based on where they come from, and the political discourse about what type of crisis or conflict they're coming from. And I think there's a lot to be said about the Ukraine conflict comparatively. Sure.
So is that to say that the whiter your skin is, the better care you get in the process?
I think that is kind of an underlying concept that I'm touching on. Obviously, in practice, it doesn't equate to that. But I do think that there is something to be said about the experiences of these Black and brown migrants, the discrimination that they face, and the limitations that they face under these immigration policies in comparison to the way that Ukrainian migrants were being received.
Okay.
And like I said, there was a sense of empathy towards these Ukrainian migrants coming in that I don't think was given to Central American and Haitian migrants. They were more perceived as a problem. They were coming and creating a crisis. They were coming in caravans and creating issue at our border, rather than some people that should be welcomed with open arms and expedited processing.
Okay, so I'll be covering queer persecution along the borderlands. As we all know, LGBT individuals in the U.S. and beyond have faced immense discrimination in comparison to in this comparison to the average immigrant, they're facing much more vulnerabilities due to their intersecting identity. Homophobia stems from a history of colonization. Currently, there's over 60 countries that have laws against LGBT individuals, all the way to being punishable to death. The history of colonization has created this idea of machismo or strong aggressive pride, which has essentially created our idea of the patriarchy and has led to vulnerable immigrants who are queer getting the worst treatment and being extremely susceptible to violence, and that is not acknowledged. So the crime of being queer, homophobia doesn't only affect the individual that's being persecuted, but it affects all the individuals in the area. If one individual is killed, threatened, or faces any sort of crisis based on their identity, that will affect all their friends, their community that's around them. And this will lead to individuals wanting to migrate and find a safe place so that that threat doesn't eventually come to them. According to the Refugee Act of 1980, in order to be eligible for asylum, one must prove persecution based on a well-founded fear of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. For queer immigrants, they would most likely fall in the social group category. The only issue is that we come to proving one's actual identity and proving that that identity has been persecuted and has led them to be in a phase of vulnerability. Individuals, it's difficult to prove your identity when you're not out in a sense, or maybe you don't look, whatever the definition of looking queer is. Many of these individuals come seeking asylum and they are not able to come out of the closet because that'll put them in an even more dangerous situation. So they maintain a, straight look to protect themselves, but this results in when they look for asylum, they're not granted it. CBP officers have the authority to stereotype and degrade queer asylum seekers based on their own definition of what it means to be queer and what qualifies one to be LGBT. So for Carlos, he's a 25-year-old interviewed by Amnesty International, and he was being beat at home while also facing threats from the neighborhood gang. He fled from Honduras to the US and was not granted asylum because he was not able to prove his persecution. Individuals will come, and unless they have, direct scarring on their body that proves that they've been abused based on their gender, then they'll be allowed in. But these requirements lead one to prove their identity, and that's extremely hard. And there's no checklist required when individuals are applying for asylum, and there's no actual outline of what this means. Individuals aren't taken seriously overall at the end of the day. And this has just escalated with COVID. So as we've said, these individuals have been kept in camps and in encampments and tents. This has not only placed more individuals in an even more dangerous situation, like we said, but when individuals have an intersecting identity, they are far more susceptible to violence. According to the organization Al Otro Lado, they said that Mexico is the second deadliest country for transgender individuals, specifically transgender women. And they said that from 2013 to 2017, there was about 260 individuals that were killed, transgender individuals were killed based off their identity. And like I said, Title 42 has then blocked these individuals from entering the US unless they're able to prove their identity, then being forced to remain in Mexico and stay in these encampments where they face threats from not only the other individuals in the encampments, but gangs, and they don't feel safe even being sent there in Mexico. They don't know anyone, just like we said before. The Department of Homeland Security did recognize these vulnerabilities of queer migrants on December 2nd, 2022 or 2021. They stated that those at increased risk of harm in Mexico due to their sexual orientation or gender identity would be exempted from processing under MPP due to their particular vulnerabilities. This has not been the case. They have not been exempted from MPP. They have continued to be processed under these extremely dangerous situations, and the process itself just leads individuals to face more discrimination, whether it be from the CBP officers themselves or from the institutions that are blocking them. Continue. Just getting that somewhere. Another layer of discrimination which exists is the issue of the disease HIV and AIDS. So individuals with HIV will commonly migrate to the US so that they can seek some sort of proper care and protection. Lack of medical treatment is not considered persecution in the US under US asylum law. While individuals can go to the US and say that they have HIV and claim asylum that way, the lack of treatment and lack of proper care that they're facing in their origin country will not be accepted. And many of these individuals are, like I said, lacking basic treatment because of the discrimination that's within the healthcare system itself. Many people in Mexico view the issue of disease, of specifically HIV, to queerness and view them as one and the same. And that can't be separated, and they view it as almost a sort of danger. As we've seen with COVID, individuals with COVID have been viewed as like, for instance, migrants have always been viewed as having carriers of disease. They're dirty, they're unclean. And this issue of HIV and AIDS only increases the risk for queer immigrants, and they can't even get the access that they need to get better. So while they're staying in these camps, they're susceptible to more disease, not only COVID, but also HIV and AIDS. And these individuals have been told by the US that they would be granted at least 3 months of medication, but that has not been the case. Many of these individuals have been left with no access, no communication, no one to go to. They have no information. And so they're left basically to suffer along the border until they can figure out some way to get some proper help. There's moralistic understandings of the disease type of queerness, like I said, and this idea that they deserve it. So they're queer, that's their own fault, and now they're on the border to basically fend for themselves and see if they can last until these policies are taken away and they can access asylum processes and get access to actual health care. So the flow of migration has gone through waves, but with queer immigrants, it just continues to rise, especially from the Northern Triangle, being Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. These individuals continue to face threats from, like I said, their family, their neighborhood. Everywhere they go, they sense that their borderism is technically obsolete. They face discrimination no matter whether they cross the border or not of their home country. They are wanting to reach the US and are continuously facing borders, which place them in a more dangerous situation. And efforts by the US to keep POC asylum seekers out of the country have led to most vulnerable individuals being placed in even more dangerous situations without the help they need, without proper health care, like we said, and facing even more discrimination based on their identity. And to close out our presentation, we want to show some policy recommendations that we would like to see implemented since the end of Title 42 happened. I'll just list them off, but we want to ensure that every individual applying for asylum in the US has access to a fair hearing in which their claims will receive full and adequate consideration. These individuals should provide safe and sanitary, sufficient housing for those who have applied for asylum in the US and are waiting for their court-dated interviews. There should be a prohibition of the expelling of migrants back to their origin country. There should be no reason that immigrants who are fleeing their home country based on persecution should then be sent back to their origin country because they weren't able to prove their discrimination or it wasn't seen as worse enough to get into the US and to be able to access humanitarian parole. So we also must be upholding and enforcing Mexican human rights laws. Currently, I know that LGBT rights are completely, they just passed the law, I believe in 2017 or 2018, regarding all the laws and regarding LGBT individuals in Mexico having rights, but as we've seen, it has not been the case, and individuals are still getting their human rights laws violated. We must hold CBP officers and asylum officials accountable for their actions. There must be language and racial justice. Like we mentioned before, language barriers are an extremely difficult part of the asylum process, and individuals are not able to go into the asylum process if they don't even know what's going on, and they can't read the documents that the US is giving them to fill out. So, and that's not even the documents that goes into public health, rental rights, employment discrimination, and detention centers. Many of these individuals don't speak Spanish mainly, and many of the documents that are given to them are only in English and Spanish, leaving those indigenous individuals who may not speak the Spanish language and Haitian individuals and all the other languages that exist just left out. We must take steps to ensure that LGBT individuals feel safe and secure during their asylum process. So that just means increasing Border Patrol training so that they know how to interact with these individuals. And that goes for all officials that are working in asylum, whether it be the asylum worker or even just those that are taking documents like therapists or anything like that. They must be trained and ensure that non-discriminatory policies are in place and appropriate detention centers. So if individuals are trans or they don't feel comfortable in either the male or female, they just have their own detention center where they can feel safe from discriminatory factors. And that's about it. There's a lot more recommendations that we would love to have up there, but these are the ones that we felt that were the most important. But yeah, thank you guys, and we would love to take some questions.
Yeah, some questions, yes. Any questions? Don't be shy.
What's the CBP officer?
Customs and Border Patrol.
So they're the folks that you encounter when you're coming in or out of the United States.
So do Ukrainian refugees do like a separate process, or do they have the same experience?
Yeah, so the humanitarian parole is the process of which Ukrainians were accepted into the United States because of like the political situation and the violence in Ukraine because of the Russian invasion. So they were processed similarly to other people who are getting accepted through humanitarian parole, but the Biden administration put an emphasis on the expedited processing for Ukrainians and also had like mass media coverage to empathize and kind of ensure the processing for these folks to be legitimate, fast, and secure, which wasn't the same attitude as others. So in practice, especially with the volunteer organization or volunteer efforts coming from all over California and also across the United States, the experiences ended up being a little bit different. And there was more like sense of urgency there.
On that note, when I was working at El Otro Lado, there was during a time when I was working there when the war broke out, and so these encampments started popping up. And when the Ukrainian refugees arrived, they actually protested the barriers that were in place. And the next day after they protested, they all lined up and sat down with their signs. The very next day, that protest was gone. All those individuals had basically vanished in a sense, They were expedited into the US due to their protest overnight. Whereas the encampments of these individuals who have been waiting months, years remained. And so it's just the difference in how these individuals are received by the US.
So the people that were there for months, were they like darker colored people?
I mean, like, it's all depends. It's like,
But mostly coming from Central America.
it's Central America, Haitian migrants, and then the rest of the Caribbean as well sometimes.
Okay,
Sorry,
those
let-
migrants were trying to.
Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. Can you guys share the questions that pueden oír las preguntas que está haciendo los estudiantes?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Sorry, Don. Sorry. No, you can keep it on.
Wasn't there?
Yeah, you had a question about people of color.
Oh, yes. The people that were coming from Central America and Haiti, were they coming here on their own volition, escaping like natural disasters / dictatorships?
Definitely.
Yes.
So the
Okay.
majority of these folks, like most times, are escaping like political repression,
Yeah.
gang violence, gender-based violence, economic difficulties. I mean, the list really goes on and on. Climate change, droughts, hurricanes, even, and just unlivable circumstances in their own countries.
Yeah.
And also because it kind of comes to more of like a cultural thing, especially in economic terms. Like when you come to a certain age, there's expectations for you to go north in certain countries to like pursue like maybe an economic lifestyle to support your family. It's been increasing in recent years.
Okay.
So is it like the US kind of has a caste system of itself when it comes to accepting the people who are coming here for asylum?
What was the question?
Sorry, Christina, can you repeat the question?
Oh, it's kind of coming to what he said. So is it like the US has its own caste system when it comes to the people they're allowing into asylum type thing. Like that.
Okay, so let me repeat the question. So what Christina is asking is, would you therefore come to the conclusion, right, Christina, that the United States has created its own caste system with the way that it treats?
Así que la pregunta es, los Estados Unidos ha creado como un sistema sobre quién está aceptado y que tiene mayor compasión humanitaria hacia... Y ese es un gran punto para ser argumentado, sobre todo si comparamos estas experiencias. Vienen hacia las preguntas como, ¿quién está teniendo apoyo humanitario? ¿En qué manera? Por ejemplo, si hacemos estas comparaciones, estamos hablando sobre diferentes tipos, que tiene que ver con temas como religión y que este proyecto pudiera ser discutido. Me gustaría saber cómo yo, como parte de la comunidad, puedo ayudar a que estas reglas en la comunidad cambien y poder ayudar. ¿Cómo puedo hacerlo? Puedo hacer voluntariado, pero quiero saber cómo realmente puedo hacer un cambio en... Si alguien no escuchó la pregunta, es cómo es que podemos ayudar como parte de la comunidad, cómo movilizarnos para ayudar y proponer a los paneles para que estas leyes realmente cambien. Esta sería como la pregunta más importante y sería como realmente involucrarnos en voluntariado, hablar con nuestras familias. Y una de las cosas más difíciles y más importantes es hablar con nuestros representantes, realmente hablar con ellos, mirar estas políticas y hablar con ellos y tratar de hacer un cambio en esto. Ejercer esa presión para poder hablar con los representativos y hablar sobre estos problemas que realmente están pasando. Y la mayoría de estas personas son hombres blancos y ellos usualmente solo piensan en ellos y debemos de hablar sobre las personas en estos casos para que haya una representación. Pero porque a veces podemos ver simplemente como llama este número para ayudar o escribir en algo, pero realmente debemos involucrarnos y a veces llamas y no recibes una llamada de regreso, no tienes una continuación. Yo acabo de regresar al Congreso y yo estuve trabajando con una representante en Los Ángeles y también sobre Washington, D.C. Y estuvimos teniendo conversaciones con hombres y mujeres del Congreso. Estuvimos hablando sobre todos los problemas y sobre todas las cosas a consideración para cambiar esas políticas. También votar es muy importante y también debemos tener que involucrarnos. Bueno, creo que tener estas conversaciones en todos los aspectos de nuestra vida social pueden estar con amigos, con personas, a ser más abiertas para hablar sobre esto y sobre lo que queremos ver el cambio, hacer que otras personas se involucren. Bueno, primero que nada, gracias por su presentación. Fue una muy buena presentación. Tengo una pregunta para ustedes. Si ustedes pudieran ayudar de alguna manera, si la migra de Estados Unidos ha estado trabajando con la migra de México, no sé si ustedes han podido ver algo en su investigación sobre esto. Bueno, la pregunta que Enrique nos hace es, ¿han encontrado algún tipo de evidencia o información que muestre que la migración, los servicios de migración en México ha estado colaborando en el territorio mexicano con los Estados Unidos? Sí, gran pregunta. Creo que nuestra investigación, un punto en particular que podemos encontrar es que en CBP, durante MVP, donde estuvieron juntos individuos y tener información sobre la lista, hubo mucha responsabilidad sobre los Estados Unidos y tratando de tener más control sobre estas personas. Y adicionalmente, el gobierno de los Estados Unidos ha estado colaborando para tener puntos detrás de la frontera de los Estados Unidos, encontrar a las personas y deportarlas antes, incluso llegar a la frontera de los Estados Unidos, y colaborar de una manera en la que pueden limitar los cuerpos que llegan a los Estados Unidos. Y creo que eso es lo que sabemos sobre el programa que está hablando en México, que puedo decir que sí había una colaboración entre el gobierno de los Estados Unidos y de México. Sí, de hecho yo vivo cerca de la frontera en Tijuana y me pregunto si las nuevas prácticas de aislar migrantes a veces en un día dejándolos sin comida y sin agua. No sé si alguien está enterado de eso, hablar sobre esto, porque es muy serio en las personas que no lo saben. Así que la pregunta que Katy nos hace es, ¿han visto algún tipo de evidencia o están enterados de estas prácticas que están pasando ahora en las que las patrullas fuerzan a los migrantes a dejarlos, los dejan ahí entre las dos barreras durante días, sin comida, sin agua y sin nada? Creo que personalmente, la última vez que trabajé en México, no estoy familiar con este tipo de práctica, pero sé que durante el COVID hubo muchos métodos migrantes y poniéndolos en problemas de higiene, baños, comida y agua, y especialmente expuestos a diferentes condiciones de clima. Así que esto no creo que sea algo nuevo, especialmente en el COVID, porque ya había muchas personas que ya sabían que hacer eso, sobre todo para las personas nuevas, pero lo que tú escribirías sería como algo nuevo, ya que pudiera ser algo muy terrífico. Las personas han habido personas monitoreando esta situación, pero nadie ha sabido realmente cómo hacer algo al respecto sobre esto. Personalmente yo no escuché sobre esto tampoco. ¿Alguna otra pregunta?
About the tactics of manipulation against to immigrants that consider abuse of authority.
Yes. I think so he's asking about the abuse of authority of
Así que él estaba hablando, preguntando sobre el abuso migratorio. Hay incontables reportes abusando de su poder hacia poblaciones discriminando a grupos como la comunidad LGBT. He visto diferentes testimonios en Oaxaca que han sido traumatizados por estos oficiales. Porque las mujeres han estado siendo violadas por estos agentes, están siendo forzadas a firmar documentos que ellas no entienden, están obligándolas a tomar sus manos y que firmen, donde tratando de formar a los migrantes para que firmen este tipo de documentos. No tengo el mejor entendimiento sobre esto, pero hay una actitud, hay un factor de miedo en estas personas y están tratando de detener a estas personas, de tratar de detener a estos estatus legales. Hay muy poca humanidad. CBP es una de las agencias con mayor como mecanismos que están trabajando. Es también y hay muy pocos crímenes que están haciendo y evidencias que están quedando. Es un problema muy grande. Como el incidente que está hablando, ellos están pero ellos encontraron estos problemas que no hay ningún problema contra ellos. Otro ejemplo del que podemos hablar que está pasando en este momento, que es un estacio que está en San Isidro, en Tijuana. Este es uno de los más serios casos que han escuchado, pero no se le está tomando interés o la importancia que debería.
Mireli's asking, the question Mireli asked was,
Bueno, ella está preguntando sobre que ella observó en la presentación que el lenguaje y esto está siendo un problema y que estos migrantes están siendo forzados a firmar documentos que ellos ni siquiera entienden. Así que la pregunta que ella está haciendo es, ¿cómo puedo ayudar a estos inmigrantes a Ella pregunta que si no hay alguna manera de poder traducir estos documentos. Como he dicho, hay muchas personas que ellos no hablan las lenguas indígenas de Centroamérica, no hay apoyo, no hay personas que puedan traducir estos documentos. Hay muy poca motivación para afectar de manera buena a estos migrantes y más que Un problema legal es uno enorme. Cuando estás presentando tu caso, debes de probar que tienes suficiente y muy buena, gran nivel de persecución si estás tratando de regresar a tu país, serás seguido. Y debes de escribir las cosas correctas para que realmente te consideren. Y cuando no eres entendido en lo que te dicen, porque tal vez ellos no hablan español o inglés, o tal vez no tengan de traducción, tal vez no será aceptado. Y hay un nivel de exclusividad para determinar a las personas para tener acceso a este tipo de servicios legales, y es un método para poder aceptar a muy pocas personas. Con documentos muy específicos, muy poco se puede hacer, ya que no es muy difícil para estas organizaciones ayudar para traducir estos conocidos documentos en diferentes lenguas, pero es el esfuerzo que no se hace. Algunas de estas personas que son de Afganistán, no les provee traductores, y si ellos buscan son muy caros, y ese es un gran problema también. Y es la muy poca ayuda, y es muy difícil para esas personas poder tener apoyo y ayuda.
Miguel is asking is, well, if you had to choose, should you fund more transportation issues or translation issues?
Ha habido problemas en transportación y de traducción. Los problemas de inmigración. Bueno, esta es una muy buena pregunta, y creo que pudiera ser un poco más información para ver cómo pudiera trabajar, qué y de qué manera. Creo que los servicios de traducción son muy grandes, y creo que hay incluso más apoyo en esto que en los servicios de salud y de transportación. Y hay facilidad para hacer esto. Y esta es una situación difícil, la de las mujeres para acceder a servicios de salud, ya que muchas personas mueren. Creo que los servicios de traducción es uno muy bueno, pero esto sin duda no hace menos problemático el problema de migración, sobre todo como los servicios de migración, donde los obligan a trabajar en lugares que no conocen. Así que son buenos, pero
I just feel like there's a lot that goes into the entire asylum process, and it's just hard to like even pinpoint these two things, because even while we're talking, I'm like, okay, well, housing is also an issue, and there's just so many other factors that it's just the entire asylum process.
hay muchos otros factores en donde pudiéramos poder ayudar a estas personas. Hay muchos cambios que nos gustaría hacer, y cuál es más importante y que es difícil, pero si conocen a alguien que al idioma, sí pueden hacer voluntariado y que no sea español, podemos hacerlo para ayudar a esas personas, y podemos proveerles ayuda para que los agentes del CBP o el gobierno que no venga de su ayuda, pero podemos hacerlo nosotros como un voluntariado. O México, siendo como una organización fuera parte del gobierno. Yo personalmente creo que lo servicio de traducción es bueno, pero viendo que estas personas tienen problemas de idioma, ellos también pasan por problemas de discriminación, ellos tienen problemas, así que tal vez ellos tengan más una habilidad de poderlos ayudar con el papeleo o en estos servicios de traducción para la discriminación que están afectando, para darles estos servicios de ayuda. Deben de pagar más ellos sobre esto y siendo que podemos ayudarles más de esta manera y puede ser más efectivo. O no lo sé realmente. Por ejemplo, honestamente, mi opinión personal. La pregunta que Ana hizo es si que notó en el pasado sobre los refugiados asiáticos, que ella ya no los ha visto, esas poblaciones tan grandes ahora, es que estos refugiados asiáticos ya no están trabajando o se han convertido residentes en Tijuana o han sido movidos hacia el centro o qué está pasando. Yo diría que estas personas, muchas de estas personas han estado esperando por periodos muy grandes de tiempo, así que ellos se han tenido que sentir forzados a integrarse en las comunidades mexicanas, ya que no tienen acceso a comida, agua. Ellos quieren pues sobrevivir, tener un trabajo y han tenido que desarrollar estas habilidades para poderse integrar y adaptarse a este sistema y buscar esa manera de integrarse, porque si eres lo suficientemente afortunado puedes encontrar un trabajo, pero los individuos de la comunidad LGBT han tenido muy poco acceso a estos factores. Muchos individuos transgéneros han tenido muy poco oportunidad en buscar un empleo o integrarse en la vida y en las comunidades y han sido forzados a integrarse y esto ha sido difícil en su proceso de asilo. También la Administración de México ha dado algunas visas para estas personas, ya que teniendo los documentos adecuados es fácil para ellos encontrar trabajo, vivienda, pero si no, se han tenido que ver vistos a tener que esperar en México por tanto tiempo que se han tenido que adaptar a la idea de adaptarse aquí en México. Y creo que de esto, en múltiples ocasiones, por diferentes ocasiones, creo que, como podemos decir, las personas en México han tenido muy poca documentación y apoyo en eso. Y también estamos hablando de diferentes casos. Y, por ejemplo, tenerse que adaptar en San Diego, moverse o incluso es un poco difícil a veces.
Yeah.
So the question Karina asked is,
La pregunta que hizo Karina es en referencias a estas grupos administrativos, en su opinión, ¿cuál es la mejor manera de poder llegar a estas administraciones? Esa es una muy buena pregunta. Creo que en general los Estados Unidos deberían sentir responsabilidad en este sector, tomar ayuda en ayudar a estas personas con servicios públicos, especialmente cuando se refiere a migrantes y refugiados. Espero afortunadamente que se creen programas que se manejen mejor y que se involucren en este tipo de industria y tratar de hacerlo tan efectivamente como pudiéramos lograrlo. Creo que en general las escuelas pueden ser un mejor lugar en requerir voluntariado antes de que los graduados puedan ayudar en voluntariados que empodere a estas comunidades. Las comunidades pueden juntarse para crear sus propias organizaciones, pero creo que está probado que es efectivamente bueno buscar cerca de ti que puedes ayudar, qué organizaciones, que está abierto para ti como un voluntariado, acercarte a tu escuela, hablar con tus profesores. Yo tuve mi trabajo como en un voluntariado acercándome con uno de mis profesores y ahora me gustaría realmente que me paguen y hacer un muy buen trabajo con esto y poder hacer esto en aspectos cercanos a tu escuela es muy bueno porque puedes encontrar buenos recursos y esto puede llevarte a llevar a algo en lo que puedas ayudar en este sector y pudiera ser realmente muy efectivo. Yo diría que más que efectivamente un voluntariado, podemos comunicar a las personas alrededor de ti, porque no sabes qué impacto puede tener lo que tú dices en tus personas alrededor, pero porque tal vez tú no lo puedes decir, pero tal vez uno de tus amigos sí. Así que como dije anteriormente, pudiéramos hablar de cosas distintas. Y también algo de lo que me gusta hacer es mantenerme activo, cosas sencillas, cosas en Instagram y cuando ellas necesiten apoyo. Porque puedes encontrar personas como, oh, estamos buscando personas que ayuden a los migrantes que acaban de llegar y puedes ayudar en cosas tan sencillas como hacer que se sientan cómodos, felices de estar aquí. Compartir algo en tus redes sociales puede hacer que tal vez alguien lo sepa y que esté informado, que sepa qué está sucediendo y esa comunicación puede llevar a algo bueno. Podemos hacer algo que pueda ser asombroso. Yo he tenido tiempo para esto, pero al mismo tiempo hay mucho privilegio dedicado a esto porque algunas personas no tienen tiempo porque tienen trabajo o estar con sus papás o hacer tareas. Así que lo que podemos hacer es estar involucrados, investigar qué cosas están pasando, repostear cosas, llamar a nuestros representantes. Son cosas que pueden tomarnos a veces solo 5 minutos. Cosas tan simples para personas que a veces no tienen el tiempo para dedicar tanto de ellos. Personas que no necesitan o que necesitan ropa, comida, ir a estos centros y buscar la manera de apoyar. Poder repostear estas cosas porque a veces las personas pueden verlo. Bueno, gracias. Creo que nos hemos quedado con tiempo. Quiero agradecer a la audiencia, al panel por su excelente presentación y gracias por participar. Gracias.
Recordings.